All right, Krystal, what's on your radar?
All right, boys and girls, let's talk about a hot topic right now. The rule of law. The utter breakdown of what you might call the norms and guardrails of society is manifest across the country as outraged rioters take to the streets in every major American city. But let's take a moment to think a little bit harder about that breakdown of civil society and what it actually means. First of all, let's return to a stat that struck Sagar and I a while back, which we brought up many times in this show. Back in the fall of 2019, researchers published the results of a study on the number of Americans who had essentially embraced chaos. According to those researchers, 40% want to just let it all burn. And remember, that was before Bernie's Not Me Us movement was snuffed out, before coronavirus devastated the poor, before the corporate bailouts and mass unemployment, before a new spate of racist murders ignited the entire country in both peaceful protests and in riots. So what do those numbers really mean? Well, they should have been flashing red alarm bells for everyone in power, for everyone with anything at stake in this current system, with anything to lose. Because it means that for a large mass of people, this government and all its institutions and our entire society has lost all credibility. And worse, they've lost hope that those institutions can be peaceably reformed through the processes we have. As one citizen explained about her hopelessness in voting for change, I just don't think that's how change happens. They've been telling us to do that for so long, and we've done it. And look at everything that's still going on. Dr. Cornel West put it well on CNN.
But I think we are witnessing America as a failed social experiment. And what I mean by that is that the history of black people for over 200 and some years in America has been looking at America's failure. Its capitalist economy could not generate and deliver in such a way that people could live lives of decency. The nation state, its criminal justice system, its legal system could not generate protection of rights and liberties. And now our culture, of course, is so market driven, everybody for sale, everything for sale. It can't deliver the kind of really real nourishment for soul, for meaning, for purpose. And so when you get this perfect storm of all of these multiple failures at these different levels of the American empire.
He's exactly right. In spite of its wealth, this country has failed to provide for the economic, spiritual, and dignity needs of its people. And let's be honest, there's seldom been a more obvious and blatant gap between what is right, just, and moral and what the rules and the laws actually are. When you have a corporate and Wall Street looting while millions are pushed onto unemployment, losing their health insurance in the midst of a pandemic, a policy, by the way, that was backed nearly unanimously by both parties, how do you feel then about the rule of law? Do those rules seem fair? Do they feel like they're evenly applied, like they're designed for your benefit or for your oppression? Or as another example, when you watch the very people who lied us into war and justified torture and instituted programs of illegal mass surveillance never face accountability and, in fact, rehabbed with lucrative gigs as resistance heroes. How do you feel about the rule of law? Or when banksters crash the entire economy, irreparably destroying middle-class wealth and middle-class jobs, especially in Black and Latino communities. We just covered how Goldman Sachs, as punishment for their criminal behavior in the housing crisis, was forced to take on distressed mortgages. They then quickly turned around, figured out how to profit off of them, and kicked thousands of Americans out of their homes. How does that make you feel about the rule of law? Or certainly, when you watch the life of George Floyd casually snuffed down on a street as 3 police officers looked on for the crime of passing a forged $20 bill, how do you feel then about that rule of law? When the rule of law has been so twisted and perverted by elites to their own benefit, when they've constructed a system in which working-class citizens are conscripted to oppress and torment other working-class citizens under the guise of law and order to protect some and police others, when the looting is codified and justified for the rich and criminalized and racialized for the poor. Are you surprised when such a large mass says, forget about your law and order? If we watch the breakdown we are seeing now occur in another country, we'd say, of course, exactly this outcome unfolding before us in every American city is possible. Maybe it's likely, maybe it's inevitable. Now look, that doesn't absolve anyone of many of the evil acts that I've seen, plenty of acts of protesters that no one should seek to justify. No matter the system, we are still responsible for our own actions and our own conduct. But this really brings us right to the crux of the matter. What to make of the rioting, of the stealing, property damage, setting buildings and police vehicles on fire? Well, to start with, let's not forget this entire country was founded, at least in our mythology, on a great act of rebellion and property destruction with the Tea Party at Boston Harbor. If you're asking if I believe that there could be moral actors among those using radical tactics, the answer is yes. Yes, I believe that inequality and capitalist exploitation and militarism and ballot choices that really represent no choice at all can lead a moral actor to conclude that property damage and rioting are moral choices. We've been sitting here on this show for months saying, just wait. You've got no idea the kind of pent-up rage which exists. Just wait until the facade of servitude and obsequience cracks. Am I in a position to judge the pure heart, intent, and morality of those involved? Of course not. Those looking for a convenient outside agitators and bad actors narrative are actively ignoring what's staring them right in the face. Some regular people have actually been pushed this far. They actually feel that the peaceful means have been exhausted. Because when a movement is defanged, when you know it poses no real threat, that it's just going to do its little march and go away, frankly, we've all seen what happens. How many damn marches have we had in the past few years? Sure, Ross Douthat writes about studies which show riots lead to more votes for Republicans than Democrats. Maybe people aren't really measuring progress by how many Democrats we elect anymore. After all, Black Lives Matter began under a Democratic president, and our nation's first black president at that. We also shouldn't sanitize the bloody civil rights era. As my former colleague, Professor Melissa Harris Perry, points out, the civil rights movement was not nonviolent. Black protesters used strategies of nonviolent direct action, and at every point they were met with brutal white supremacist state violence and death. That ish was not peaceful. It was painful, bloody, horrific. And we can't forget, too, that in addition that the success of the nonviolence of the civil rights movement did not occur without the context of the ominous threat of an alternative approach. I don't know that seeing these riots as a movement, frankly, though, is quite the right way to think of them. There's no leader. There's no list of demands other than to actually recognize the worth and humanity of all, which is a radical and revolutionary demand indeed. It's a visceral howl of rage, and it is a message that we should listen to. We see through your corrupt rule of law, and your normal tools of control aren't going to work any longer. Sagar, part of what is so incredibly uncomfortable here is that we like to have this bright line between the good actors and those people and these people, the good ones and the bad ones. And in a situation like this, that line starts to dissolve.
Yeah, I'm going to be doing my radar on a lot of the Democratic reaction on that front. And I think what's so fascinating about your radar, I was really thinking about this while you were doing it, is I think it shows the fundamental difference between like a liberal and a conservative disposition. Because what I bring to this is very much the same of like, I mean, we've been talking about it for months, which is that the conditions have been set, that you have to have compassion for people and meet them where they are. However, what I really understand here, which is that even if you have a moral actor who is behaving and, is looting, who is rioting, destroying property, is that doesn't mean that it's not incumbent on the state to also protect other moral actors within the system, as in a business owner. Because remember, it's not just Louis Vuitton stores and big corporations that are getting rioted. I'll play some footage of a small business owner and residents who have been absolutely terrorized by what's happening. And what I really fear and worry about is, and we're going to talk about this with Zed Jilani, is that this is very much the precepts for whenever you have an abdication by the state and the allowance of this type of rioting and looting and crime, is that it opens the door to complete tribalization of politics. Is that whenever one group feels, and they feel this way, that is why they are doing this, that they have complete no moral authority within the state itself is almost illegitimate, and they're rioting and protesting against it.
That they have no voice,
that they have no voice
in the official channels.
Right, but when you also see another group, whenever you ever see a group which is being terrorized, when you see a group who's losing things and has no cultural ability in order to speak on their behalf, that is when you see sectarian and tribal violence. And that is the thing that I worry the most about. And that's why, as uncomfortable as it is, we have to embrace the idea that the worst actors within this movement, even if, be they moral or not, must be punished, and that order must be restored in that way. And that is what I want to emphasize, because I love this country so much, and I do not want to, on our way here, things are burned, there's glass broken, the city which we love is just being destroyed. And even in working class communities, I actually watched yesterday that in the midst of the riots, that it was actually capitalized on by gang violence, and that there were drive-by shootings. And the speculation in our community right now, in my neighborhood, is that the gangs took advantage of the fact that all of the police were at the protests.
And there's lots of certainly opportunistic and awful behavior that is taking advantage of exactly those dynamics. I mean, there's also been lots of horrific acts of police violence that should be held accountable as well. And that's part of the instinct in this situation is like, let's bring in the military, let's militarize, and that just ups the tensions. I mean, the places that we've seen that have had the most success are actually where the police have been most sympathetic, have de-escalated the situation. Unfortunately, that's not what we're seeing in most of the country. And also, we should be clear, the scenes are horrific across the country. I mean, we both walked by, burned down all kinds of stuff and graffiti and all of those things on the way here. But the vast majority of these protests are actually peaceful. I mean, there's,
it's a disservice to them. It really is.
During the day, mostly massive peaceful protesters, and then there's rioting at night. But again, I think the complicating factor is that line between the good ones and the bad ones dissolves. I mean, one of the things I've been thinking about is the mission of this show. Right. And what we do, which really no one else does, which is to have someone with your perspective, someone with my perspective. And I don't know that we've ever faced an issue or a crisis in the country, anything that challenges that kind of core concept of the show as much as this particular dynamic does. And so I just think it's important to put that out there, too, that we're trying to navigate this in the best way that we can. But I think ultimately, a lot of people wanted to, and this was a left-right thing, and you're going to cover some of this as well. A lot of people wanted to say this is outside agitators. This is white nationalists. It's Russia, right? It's Boogaloo. It's Antifa.
Yeah, right.
And because why? Because if it's just the bad people doing the bad things, quote unquote, then you could say, let's just push them to the side. That's not what this represents. But I don't think you can ignore that you have regular people who really feel this pushed up against the wall, that they would take the kind of actions that in normal circumstances would be unthinkable, outlandish, out of character, et cetera. And that is a piece of information that we can't look away from, that we can't excuse and say, we can't excuse, but we also can't say, oh, these are just the bad ones, that we can put them over here, we cannot think about them, we can ignore them. No, these are people that maybe you've known, maybe you've interacted with, people that would pass you on the street and you wouldn't think anything of in a normal day. We can't afford to look away from that and what that says about where the country is.
I think that's right, which is, look, is Antifa involved? Yes. Are there criminals and other opportunists? Yes. But there are some people who legitimately feel this way. And like I said, their perspective, it's not illegitimate to me. I don't believe in that. I don't think there are such things as really like illegitimate perspectives. Instead,
well, I mean, we covered the
lockdown protesters. The same thing with a lot of compassion for, hey, I understand where you're coming from. I don't think there's moral equivalence necessarily between the two, but I think it's important to note. Instead, what I say is, instead of judging the legitimacy or illegitimacy of the opinion, it's more about what is the responsibility of the state to the citizen. And in this particular case, I think that there has been a massive abdication from President Trump all the way down from many of these mayors and the police departments, which have refused to make sure that people are kept safe. We have seen horrific beatings, people's things being burned. I mean, terrible actions by some of these people that have been perpetrated on average, regular citizens, many of whom are working class. And you can juxtapose it right alongside many of these cops. I am disgusted by their behavior in the way that they have treated largely peaceful protests, journalists, other people in our profession. And if you just want to cherry pick one side or the other, that is not going to tell you the whole story.
Right. And it is not going to tell you what it means and what any path forward is for the country.
And that is something that we are going to try so hard to forge forward here on the show, because that's the only way out.
Indeed. All right, Sagar, looking forward to your radar. That's next.